Hello programmers! We are on to part 6 of the JavaScript Lessons folder, doing TDD with Jasmine. Part 6 is, I have my spec on my right here, and I got my editor on my left. It tells me the reference error F2C is not defined in a file. I actually need to create a file to store that. So the file that I'm going to create is inside of the 06 temperature folder. I'm going to create a file named temperature.js, and I know it'll be working when I declare the function and my test changes to another error. So I'm going to just switch to a preferred style of my own. There we go. Okay. Still works? Good. Return 0. I'm going to get the first test passing here. Expected undefined equals 0. My test needs to return a value. So I should see the number of specs, the number of failures go down. The number of failures goes down by 1 when I return 0. If I return 100 here, I'll actually still have the same number of failures, but I'll have a different error cropping up. So what I actually need to do here is take an input and turn it into an output. Really, I'm taking Celsius, I'm taking Fahrenheit, and I'm returning Celsius. And I have a little page here that I brought up that has a conversion reference for Celsius to Fahrenheit. So I'm going to write a little comment about that. Okay, so this is the code that I want to run. I want to take a Fahrenheit object, and given the Fahrenheit, I'm going to minus 32 from it, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I'm actually going to accomplish the conversion by dividing by 5.9, 5 over 9, sorry. And I'm dividing by a float so that my math comes out as I expect. Boom, I just got all those tests passing in one shot. Now what happens if I change this? That works too. Now what happens if I change this to +1? Those are my tests that were previously failing. They're all off by 1. Using the correct formula allows the test to pass. So that's the first part of 06 temperature. The second part is C2F. So the solution to this is to, given a Celsius, return a Fahrenheit. And now Fahrenheit, I have a conversion that I looked up earlier. I'm just going to write that into a little comment here. And what I actually want is to take Celsius, times it by 9 over 5, at 32. My test will tell me if it's working. And boom! Now I'm down to 32 failures. Okay, so the next part is the temperature object. So if I take a look in the file, I can see a temperature object being used on line 47. Now, I generally know from looking at the error message that it expects to see something. So I give it an object, and what does it ask? Oh, it wants a constructor. So it's not enough to give it just a JavaScript literal object. I need to give it a function so that the new operator can be used. Now, the next part is that there should be a method called setFahrenheit on the object. Now, I've just created a JavaScript syntax error, so my test stopped working properly. Here we go. So now we got that, and it also wants to have Fahrenheit as a function, and it expects that Fahrenheit will return something. And it expects that Celsius is a function. And that Celsius will return something. And it expects that set Celsius is a function. And it expects that, let's see, what does it expect? It expects 0, which is my Celsius here, to be 100. Now I'm always returning 0, and if I look at line 70, which is a recent addition to the test cases, so make sure you pull in the most up-to-date ones, it's not going to function correctly unless I implement set Celsius properly. So, set Celsius could be current Celsius. So if I do that, and then I return current temperature in Celsius, and also I make sure that I declare it and initialize it to 0. Always initialize your variables. Now I have an error on line 60 where it says temperature Celsius. So I want this to be a return statement. There we go. Now, if you look at this code is incomplete. That tells me that I have a deficiency in my test. Where exactly do I have a deficiency? Well, I think I have one right here, where I don't make sure that it works for multiple values. I always like to have a null case for a test first, and then a secondary test that verifies that I have a behavior. Same thing here, set Celsius, set Fahrenheit. I really would like to have another test here, both a null test and a more extensive test. This kind of prevents me from being brainless about how I'm typing my code and gives me a better understanding of what my object actually needs to do. So I can no longer return a hard-coded value. I now need to return current temperature in Celsius, but it needs to be converted from Celsius to Fahrenheit. And my set Fahrenheit needs to actually function too. See what it means to have a really good test? Even though the tests aren't ideal, you still are able to solve them, succeed them in a way that makes sense, but I think an even better test drives you towards a specific understanding about how your classes should interoperate, or how your method calls should interoperate. For instance, set Fahrenheit, I expect setting Fahrenheit of 32 means that I can call Celsius and get 0, and setting it to 212 means I can call Celsius and get 100. So it gives me a base assumption, a null case, and then an extended case, and together they flesh out a required implementation. I think this is test-driven development. So I want to do a Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion of the number passed in, and set current temperature in Celsius to be that Celsius. Now I've solved successfully both the tests that I added, the two tests that I added, and I hope you have a little bit of an understanding why I did. If you don't, please feel free to contact me. The next part is this more interesting refactoring. It says bonus. Once the above specs pass, refactor the original functions to use your new temperature class, but then it also says privately encapsulate data. So, I just noticed a bug here. Without having a base case and an extended case, I got away with some buggy code. See, I had the 0 set here and I was actually tested. My test doesn't actually function that way. Why? Because my test says I should be able to pass in the Fahrenheit and then store it. And the storing of it should actually work. So I hope you can understand why this test is necessary. Now this little test here says privately encapsulates its data. It says please have no properties that are data values. So I'm exposing this data value, and that's why it says expected number to equal function, because in the iteration of all the properties on this object, this temperature object here, this temperature object has functions and numbers, and that's because I'm returning this. So there's another way to write this. I can return something that only has methods on it. I'm just going to rename self to be public methods. So what I'm doing is I have a closure still over this, and I have public methods. Now I would also write, now that should be enough to get it to pass, but it causes an error later on. Why is that? Because I actually want to make a copy of this in this closure. And I want to convert these to reference an enclosed variable. And the reason why I want to do this is because this is such a special keyword. This will reference public methods when used outside of this context. And actually what I want it to reference is an enclosed upon variable, which has the value of this from the new constructor for temperature. That's a tricky part about JavaScript. It is not simple in how it handles closure and closed variables. It's called lexical scoping. It's an advanced topic. it can take some time to get used to. But here's a pattern that generally tends to work. And if you can understand this, you'll be very far ahead of the curve. Thank you very much. That was Spec 6, Temperature, and goodbye, programmers.